Welcome to Creative Piecemeal Podcast, a podcast for creatives. I'm your host, Tammy Takeishi. Join me for compelling conversations with artists, actors, authors, musicians, and other creatives about the impact of the creative and fine arts in their lives and our ever-changing world. Thank you for listening. Hello and welcome to Creative Piecemeal Podcast. Today I am with my friend and fellow colleague Angelo Mincey. He's a talented pianist, vocalist, and beloved educator, currently completing his bachelor's degree. In his short tenure in undergrad, he's already performed internationally and was the 2021 semi-finalist for the Sam Houston State Piano Concerto competition with his performance of Mozart's Piano Concerto No. 20 in D minor. That's one of my personal favorites. Angelo is a star on the rise and one to watch, and I'm so excited to get to know him better. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here. Super excited. Super excited just to talk and get to know more people.
Yeah. It's going to be so fun. I'm going to start with an icebreaker question because I told myself I would do that more often instead of like the heavy hitting questions. So
Okay.
Icebreaker question is, what is one of your favorite meals to eat after a concert or a recital?
Probably Tex-Mex. I love chips and queso after a concert, and like if friends are together and just adult drinks and chips and queso just make the end of the concert, that much better. Like, put in the work, let's indulge in some chips and queso. So anything Tex-Mex, really.
That sounds tasty. Yeah, you really can't go wrong.
Exactly. The more local, the better. The less of a chain,
Mm-hmm.
the better. Just more home cooking. But yeah, those are my opinions.
Excellent. Are you a white queso or a yellow queso person?
I'm definitely a white queso. Add some taco meat, some pico de gallo in there, and you got me set.
I love talking about food. I could talk about food all day.
Exactly. Me too.
But we're here to get to know you also as a musician. So who or what inspired you to become a musician, and how did you decide on piano?
I think that there are three big inspirations growing up for me that I always recall. The first one being The Wizard of Oz. I don't know what it was about The Wizard of Oz, but something about the whole theatricality and I was born in the 90s, so this has been at least 50 years since the movie had been out at that point, but I thought it was just so magical. I think that was one of the big inspirations. Somehow, I don't even know how, I got a hold of the Selena film with Jennifer Lopez.
Oh, yeah.
And for the longest time, I thought Jennifer Lopez was Selena. And then as I grew up and realized like Selena was an actual person, she was like the big thing for me. Like everything Selena, I loved her. I think that's where my performance comes from because I loved watching Selena perform. I thought she was just so captivating. She was gorgeous, like all of the things that a person, I guess, a young kid looks at and is like, that's amazing. And then the last one for piano, I think would be Alicia Keys. I am a product of a mother who grew up in the 80s and the 90s. So Alicia Keys was kind of played around the house. And I just remember thinking like, wow, how cool these music videos. This girl's like shredding it on the piano, and that's, I think, where I got into piano was because of Alicia Keys. And I was like, I want to be a star like that.
That's excellent. I love that it's such a diverse grouping of things that inspired you and sort of led you to the creative arts.
Yeah, I agree. I try to stay diverse in the arts in general. I try not to just stay with musical theater and not just something that's moving and entertaining, but yet like physical art, paintings and statues and things like that. I think that even somehow there's inspiration throughout all of these things.
Definitely. In terms of inspiration when it comes to working on classics and, having to do all those things that you do for school, are there favorite composers and things that you can't wait to learn or that you've already learned?
For me, it is kind of hard to say that I like a specific classical composer per se, because I am not the classical pianist that grew up as a classical pianist. It was kind of something that I got into. And so the more I learn about the piano itself, the more I've learned about these composers. Of course, growing up, taking piano lessons, I knew Mozart, I knew Beethoven. You hear of Tchaikovsky every once in a while, things like that. But when it comes to classical music, there's a listening aspect and there's a performance aspect of it. Like I enjoy performing Mozart per se because I think that Mozart was just very dramatic and like over the top. But you could say the same thing about romantic composers. But with romantic composers, I enjoy listening to them more because there's a lot more technicalities, I guess, that I personally have to think about while I'm playing compared to as I've gone through more music, Mozart, playing that, it makes more sense, I guess. But I enjoy I would say Leonard Bernstein and like those composers, George Gershwin and Aaron Copland. I really do enjoy that music. I think when it comes to the classical, quote unquote, classical like music, but that's also very close to where we are today as far as music goes.
Yeah, so you seem to like the sort of post classical and the Americana.
Yeah, very much so. I would say so, yes.
Excellent. So there's a new Bernstein movie coming out. Are you gonna go see it?
I will. I do. I'm very interested in seeing that just because we've seen a Queen biopic, we've seen an Elton John biopic, and it'll be interesting to see to see a classical biopic uh and with a big name, Bradley Cooper, like being a big name playing Leonard Bernstein. Like it'll be interesting to see what story they tell, I guess. You
Mm.
never know how the like even like with this Elvis one that came out, it was a very different way of telling that story. We all know Elvis, but the way they told it was what I think makes it captivating. So I'm interested to see how and what they tell of Leonard Bernstein.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's gonna be really interesting. I love music biopics just because it's so fascinating to see how the movie industry takes the life of a musician or a band and sort of shrinks it down into 120 minutes, you know?
Right, exactly. Exactly. And Bernstein kind of did a lot. We
He
don't
did.
know that, but he did a lot. He was a pianist, composer, and a conductor.
Yeah, yeah. A legend for sure.
A legend. Oh yes.
Do you like conducting? Did they you have to take that in school still, right?
Yes, actually, I do love conducting, and it's actually probably a path I would like to continue to go down, even though I play pianist. I don't know if this has been kind of broadly mentioned, but musical theater is my biggest love. I love all things Broadway, and I would love to be a pit conductor. I think that's why I'm practicing hard at the piano because a lot of pit conductors are pianists and they need a keyboardist and whatnot. So I would love to conduct. I love that aspect and the getting to be the creative one. People are like, what do conductors do? Like, well, conductors are there for the rehearsal part. They're the ones who pull everything out and say, this is what we're going to show, and then, whatnot. So I think being a conductor would be really exciting.
Yeah, I could totally see you doing that, conducting pit of Broadway musicals and
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I
trying not to
probably
sing along while you're doing it, right?
exactly. That's why I think I've been the king of like lip syncing. Like lip sync the whole show. That way no one can hear me. I'm just jamming and conducting the whole thing.
Nice, nice. What are some of your favorite musicals that you've seen so far?
Again, I think that's a very loaded question, especially for someone who loves all things musical theater. As I guess cliche as it sounds, because it's such a long running musical, Wicked is probably my favorite musical. It was the first musical that I saw that was professional and that had that Broadway stance, like the quintessential Broadway musical. And I just remember thinking like, this is what I want to do. I want to do this somehow. I think I was in like maybe third or fourth grade. And I was like, I want to do this. I want to be that green girl. But yeah, and then I think probably shortly after that, I got exposed to Les Miserables. And between Wicked and Les Mis and Phantom, but I think I've kind of grown out of the Phantom musical theater lover as I've learned more music. But definitely those were the ones that were always in rotation. As a middle school Angelo just blaring his stereo.
That's excellent. And such good music from all three of those, very diverse as
Oh
well.
yeah. Oh yes. Very diverse. And how closely related to classical music they are. Stephen Schwartz was like studied under Leonard Bernstein, who was like studied under Rachmaninoff, and all these big composers, like, and here we are today celebrating Wicked's 20th anniversary. And it's like it has all of these big classical like nuances to it, and I don't know. I think that's also why I enjoy Wicked, is because it is such a big orchestral piece.
Yeah.
It's not as electronic as these newer things are.
They have some really intense chord changes and modulations in Wicked. I'm like, if I was an instrumentalist in that, I'd be a little bit scared to look at the music.
Oh yeah. I played The Wizard and I for one of my students for recital, and it modulates to a tritone. Like it uses a tritone the way he does it. And I'm like, huh, interesting. Now we're in like a tritone, minor fifth, whatever, like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, here we are.
It's like, well then.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Is there a musical that you haven't seen yet that you want to see?
So a new musical that I haven't seen, I think, would be Kimberly Akimbo. It's a story about a lady or a girl really, who ages 4 times faster than she should.
Oh.
So she's like 16 years old, but the actress is in her 60s. Her name is Victoria Clark, and it's like this cute little coming of age story. And I guess I'm not familiar with it, but it's on my list of shows I want to see. But I think that's probably one of the shows that I would be interested. But there's all these revivals, like the Sweeney Todd revival. I would love to see that. And I have never seen Sweeney Todd on Broadway, So that's like one of the things. They just did a production of Parade. I've never seen Parade on Broadway. I'd have loved to have seen that. So I mean, like, there's older musicals that haven't been on Broadway that are being revived that I would like to see also. I'd love New York. I try to go every couple of years and catch shows, and pretty much that's all I do. It's just like go see shows, catch up on what's new. So
well, that's fantastic. Yeah, especially as someone such as yourself with such an interest in that, that's one of the best ways is to just expose yourself to the art in the original place.
Oh yeah, exactly.
And speaking of music, what is a piece of musical advice that you always follow and one that you ignore?
One that I always follow, and it came long before this lady was on Abbott Elementary, but Cheryl Lee Ralph, who is in a TV show called Abbott Elementary, she was a Broadway star before that, and she was in like Dreamgirls and everything. And I remember seeing an interview, and she says something about know your limitations, like know what your capacity is, because once you know where you belong, then it's easier to go down this path than trying to do something that you think you want to be or who you want to be, and people tell you no. Because a lot of the times we think, I mean, for me at least, I know I'm not going to be a world-renowned concert pianist, but I know where my place is as a pianist. I know where I belong as a pianist. And so I think that's probably the biggest thing I try to like live by, is and try to remind myself that we are limited to an extent because of just being a human, to certain things. So I think that's probably the biggest thing I try to remember. And I think the biggest thing that I don't follow, it's probably the hardest thing, even as like someone who preaches this like 5 days a week to like students, is to like take it slow, and like really comprehend everything and know where everything belongs and what does what and what goes where, And so I think for me, I can always take it slow. I always want to just like get into it and be like, okay, yeah, we got this. Let's go. In all actuality, it would just be that much better if I just took my time.
Yeah, yeah. I was just preaching that to a student the other day myself.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's amazing like what happens when you let something breathe, whether it's the way you're playing something or even just the way you're living out a moment in your life, just pausing.
Oh yeah, I agree. And I always am like telling things to my students about take it slow or this and that. I'm like, this is such a life thing. Like they don't even understand. Like we could use this in life every day. But hopefully one day they'll be like, I remember my piano teacher kept saying that.
Well, speaking of piano, and obviously you sing as well, but are there any instruments besides what you already do that you would love to just experiment or try?
I would say probably maybe like the cello. I grew up playing violin for a really long time, like all throughout elementary school, middle school, and high school. And it was only because I didn't want to carry those big old instruments around. Like who wants to be that little kid hauling your cello or your bass around or something? And so I did violin, but I look back and I wish that I would have played cello. So I don't know. I also think like me as a singer who is a baritone, like the cello fits in that range, and I'm used to hearing that. So I enjoy, I guess, just hearing that darker range. But I guess maybe yeah, cello.
In terms of your creative process and how you approach a musical project, what are some of your favorite things about that and least favorite things about that?
As far as the creative process goes, the least favorite thing would be learning the music because sometimes it could take a little bit, I guess. But once you learn the music, it's a lot easier I know that sounds crazy and it sounds like, well, what? But like learning the music is the hardest part to me. Once you've got that down though, then it's like, okay, now we can kind of play with this a little bit. And I think then what would be the like rehearsal process, the experimenting with the group and the whole playing with things is always the fun part. As a pianist, we really don't collaborate that often. It's required, as a student, but we very rarely collaborate. But I find the rehearsal process like fun and getting to like talk and no, I think we should start swelling a little later here, or no, like it starts getting more chromatic here, we should swell or something. I don't know. Things like that. Or I find those interesting.
Nice. So it seems like you really enjoy sort of the aspect where you can infuse your own person into the music as opposed to the technical, let's learn it, this is where my finger goes aspect.
Yeah, I would say so. And that's I think the hardest part to get to. But once you get there and I don't know, try to experiment with this music that has been here for decades and centuries.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like it's such an honor as a musician to literally bring pieces to life that have been around for some of them hundreds of years.
Hmm.
But it's also it's also not just an honor, but it's also like a responsibility to the artist that created it.
Right. No, yeah, I agree. I agree. And that's like for the longest time I kind of was like, I never understood that. It's like, well, whatever, but now it's like, okay, it makes some sense because it's the only way that we can do this. I mean, you could put a lot of piano music into an orchestral setting, but that's not the same. People, if they did a cover of like a Beyonce song and they changed all the chords and changed the melody but kept the same words, it's like, well, yeah, I mean, kind of, but not really.
Mhm.
So I think that is it's the hardest part is the due diligence to the composers and being kind to them and being respectful even though they are not living here today. There are people out there who are like, no, I want this classical nuances and things like that.
Mhm.
So as a performer we have to give that.
Yeah, yeah. And that's why it's so important that they always they always put like music history classes in schools so that you've got more of a context of what happened during that composer's life or like what's happening in the world. I always think it's fascinating to remember that like Beethoven lived at the time that America was sort of becoming independent. It's weird to think about that.
No, yeah, and like exactly, I'm in a music history class and the Enlightenment period and the people that intrigued, being John Adams and Mozart. Like what? Like I never would have, I don't know, put that together. But yeah, that is kind of mind blowing.
Yeah, it really is because I don't know about you, but like I always have to like remember because I
Yeah,
feel like they just live on their own planet. It's like Mozart, Beethoven, Bach, Haydn, they're on their own planet.
right. Like the world of music was its actual world, its own separate world, like
Yeah.
no, I think about that too. Because people like who are a little more closer, Shostakovich, like their music was very prevalent. I felt like to their feeling on how they felt about a lot of things, Chopin with the Revolutionary Etude, like
Mhm.
it's very obvious.
Yeah, yeah, very true, very true. People closer to the time that we're currently living, it definitely makes it easier to remember that they didn't just live isolated music worlds for sure. So, if we were to sneak a peek at your music collection, what are some things we would find? Like, who are some top artists that rotate on your playlists?
I don't know if there's top artist right now as there's this top artist. I have been on a Beyonce binge. And so, but I only really listen to music now at the gym. And what other way to go to the gym than to listen to Beyonce? Some of the music is upbeat, but when I'm in the car, I don't really listen to music. I listen to podcasts because I'm always around music, at least like podcasts. I can like hear people talk for a little bit, and kind of recalibrate my hearing for,
Yeah,
to
yeah.
listening to people talk, I guess. I don't know. So, but yeah, Beyonce right now is the big one. And then whatever musical happens to go into shuffle.
Well, you can't really go wrong with Beyonce, especially if you're doing something, upbeat and or you have to
Oh
like
yeah,
work hard through it. So
exactly, exactly. You won't break my soul. I'm over here like on this elliptical, like, okay, 5 more minutes. You won't break my soul, elliptical. You got this.
I feel you there. I feel you there. Yeah, I definitely like when it comes to gym equipment, I don't go very often, but I like the elliptical better than the treadmill.
Same.
Hmm.
You will not catch me on the treadmill.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on the rower? Do you like the rower?
I do like the rower. I would do row more often, but where I go, I think it's kind of janky and it like makes this really weird noise when the wheel spins and it just causes a lot of commotion. And I don't like the attention, I guess, when I'm at the gym. So I don't row because it's really not that best. But if I had a good row or machine at the gym, then I totally would.
Yeah.
That's a nice.
It's fun. It kind of reminds me of like going forward, like you're sledding down a hill, and then you're like, oh wait, now I gotta pull back.
Yeah, yeah. No, yeah, I agree. And it kind of just makes me feel like I'm like in the water, you know?
Hmm.
Um, kiss the girl moment, you know? Sha-la-la-la-la-la. I'm
Yeah,
rolling
there you go.
Ariel around or something. I don't know.
Oh goodness. What is one of the best compliments you've ever received as a performer?
Whenever I've done like musicals, I think the biggest compliment that someone gave me when they're like, oh, I loved your character. You were so believable. Like, yeah, the character was like fun and like exciting to the character to be, but whenever people would say like, oh, that's so believable, or like it was just so fun to like watch you. I
Aww.
always enjoyed those kinds of compliments. When it comes to playing piano, I think for the longest time, the biggest compliment someone could tell me would have been, wow, that scale sounded really good. Yeah. But piano, there's just so much, you have people will say like, oh, I like your tone, or I don't know, I took that back actually. I played a four hands, one piano recital with a friend, and we both have like long hair. And someone was like, y'all got so into it, like y'all's hair was like moving in the same like direction. It was like swaying, and I was like, well, I guess that's a compliment, but that's not necessarily on my playing, but I'll take it.
There you go. There you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
How has your life in the creative arts been different than you imagined it would be?
Like I always said I wanted to like get paid for what I do, I guess. Like I didn't like I would serve tables or work retail or work call centers, and to me it was like I would rather do something that I know I love and perform or play piano or sing or stuff like that. So I think the biggest thing that I think was different is I wouldn't have guessed what I'm doing now would be my way of like making a living. I would have, I mean, if you would have asked me whenever I was a sophomore in high school in 2010, where I would be now at 30, I would have been like, oh, I'm gonna at least be an ensemble member in a Broadway musical or something, like, and that would have been my way of being successful. But I find myself probably like just more successful because I'm not struggling and not in New York City, being doing what I'm doing because I don't serve tables right now and I don't work in retail. Like I am, even if it's teaching or collaborating or performing, like the fact I get to say like, oh, I play piano for a living, or I sing and play piano for a living, or to me that I think makes it. Never would have thought that how I'm doing it right now is how I would have thought it would have been.
Yeah, yeah. And that's excellent. I love how you redefined what success means to you, and that even if you're not on Broadway, you're still making an impact and you're learning and you're creating and you're changing the world one student at a time too, you know?
Oh yeah. And I think that's also kind of crazy because I mean I've loved what I do for so long that I forget that these kids are the people that I teach, even if they're adults. And they like Broadway is just such a weird hole over there, like people know of it, but like kids come to me and they're like, oh, I do musicals. And then I'm like, okay, well, let's do some more research into more musicals. And like, there's this whole plethora of world out there. So I think that like what I'm doing is just as important to the Broadway community as anything because someone has to expose these kids to that kind of stuff, My kids would just listen to Taylor Swift all day. If I never was like, oh, let's look into like whatever musical we're doing. They have other musicals that they've written. There's a branch you can go from there and try to find other things. So I think that what I do is just as important to the Broadway community as being on Broadway. At least I try to tell myself.
Oh, of course. It's definitely super important to expose people to different forms of art and different musicals, and maybe ones that didn't get as much praise but are still wonderful.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Exactly.
And then, prepping these young students who you never know, maybe they'll be on Broadway one day.
Right. You never do. You never know.
That's the really cool thing about, I think, teaching is you never know where a student is going to end up. And it's okay if all they're ever doing is just playing for fun, because it just makes such a positive impact.
Yeah. That's something that I've had to realign myself to realize sometimes. Like, okay, well, maybe they're not going to be the best singer or they're not going to be the easiest to practice when it comes to piano, but there has to be something that I expose them to by the time they are done with it. Does that make sense? Like,
Mm-hmm.
even if they don't want to stick with it, I at least try to expose them to something new. Whether it's they're playing piano, I'm teaching piano, and I expose them to like the history of classical music, real quickly. That's Bach, Mozart, and these one or two classical or romantic composers, but
Mm-hmm.
my voice students, I always expose them to some sort of musical. Try to, at least for voice, it's easier to show emotion through singing than it is like, well, I'm playing piano. How am I supposed to show some emotion to this? I'm like, I just play whatever, like do like find some way to express yourself in piano. It doesn't have to sound pretty. You can make it sound whatever you want.
Well, in our last couple of minutes, I would love to ask you some quirky questions, like fun ones.
Okay.
So, one of them is, what is your favorite movie and what does it reveal about you?
Oh, that's another hard question. What is my favorite movie? Well, I would say the first movie that pops in my head is Lady Bird by Greta Gerwig, starring
Mm.
Saoirse Ronan and Laurie Metcalf. I think that yes, like Lady Bird, the main character's story herself isn't always like how my coming of age story was. Some of the side characters, like you've seen that movie, like there was just a lot of other side characters that was like, oh my gosh, like that was relatable in so many ways. And like Lady Bird is in this musical, and like there's all these like musical theater kid moments that I was like, oh, this movie I think is probably my favorite, and it was well shot and it represented my life.
Mhm.
So yeah, Lady Bird.
Yeah, nice. Greta Gerwig's really having a moment now too.
Oh yes, I know. Barbie is a great movie.
It is. It is. I very rarely do I walk out of a theater and go, okay, I want to turn around and see it again. Like that's how good it was.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And that's what for me, like I mean, like I'm not a producer or director, but for Greta Gerwig to see her take such care of this piece is very inspiring for me. Like, okay, well, I too have to take care of my art because that's how she's successful.
Hmm.
So yeah, that I think Greta Gerwig is an inspiration of mine.
Yeah. And that brings up such a wonderful point in our last 2 minutes, is about taking chances creatively and believing in yourself and sort of your own gut instinct about what you need to do.
No, yeah, I agree.
One final question. If you could have dinner with any creative person, dead or alive, who would it be and what would you have for the meal?
I guess it would definitely be Stephen Sondheim. He, like a lot of composers of their time, they weren't very well recepted. He just passed away not too long ago, and people love him now. Like
Yeah.
every theater company around the US and maybe the world is doing some sort of Stephen Sondheim musical.
Hmm.
And so I would love to have dinner with Stephen Sondheim, and I would probably Tex-Mex, chips and queso with Stephen Sondheim.
There you
Have a
go.
margarita or two, and chit chat about all these crazy characters he's written.
Excellent. Well, Angelo, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And listeners, please check the show notes for Angelo's bio. And as always, thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Like the show? Have a question? Stop by the Facebook and Instagram pages. Links are in the show notes, or search for Creative Piecemeal Podcast on social media and click follow for all the latest.